Hey everyone, welcome back to this episode of Coffee and UFOs with Marty Snow. Marty, thank you so much for joining on this episode. This has been a really intense week,
Sure has.
exciting week. I would say revolutionary with the hearing, the UAP hearing on Wednesday. So there's a reason I brought you on, and it's because you're very knowledgeable. We've met through mutual acquaintances, but also through MUFON as well. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in UFOs in the first place, and then we'll move on from there.
Sure. And thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation because this is probably the most exciting week for ufology I
It
think we've
is.
had to date. It's
It is.
and things are still going on. So it continues to be exciting. My background is I'm a recently retired aerospace quality specialist. I've worked on a number of space hardware programs. I've worked on aviation, rotorcraft. My interests have always gravitated around things that fly, things in the sky. My interest in UFOs started back in childhood, and I have to admit, I started out as a hoaxer. I saw a picture of a UFO, and I said, "Oh, I
Mhm.
could do that because I build models." And I built a little balsa wood flying saucer, and got the fishing string, and strung it over the line, and took some pictures with an old Kodak Brownie camera. But I was always interested in the flying saucers, and my first book I think I read was Incident at Exeter, and then I kind of got away from it, school, family, girls, that stuff, and not necessarily in that order. Um, but in 2018, I was actually with my daughter walking our dogs, and we saw a red orange orb flying over our area. Now, I live in controlled airspace, and I'm also a pilot, so I know everything that flies in and out of our airspace. I'm
Mhm.
familiar with the ISS. I'm familiar with satellites and iridium flares, and I'm familiar with drones. And this was bright, very bright. I couldn't really judge altitude. Was moving steady state, no sound, due north, heading over the lake. And just the fact that it was going north was unusual because everything here tends to go kind of east to west.
Mhm.
And that got my curiosity peaked, and I went to work, and I was working in space programs at the time, and my colleagues and I tried to figure out what it was, and we came up empty. Found out about a local UFO meetup group, and I said to my wife, I said, "Hey, I'd really like to go and just see if anybody else sees things like this." And turns out she was interested in the subject as well.
Mhm.
So we went to the meetup group. We ended up joining MUFON, and we became field investigators, and here we are.
And here we are. So what's your general takeaway of the UAP subcommittee hearing?
Well, I think this was probably the best hearing we've seen so far to date.
Mhm.
I know in a lot of the past hearings and even in some of the past published reports, I think most people in ufology feel we always come up empty handed. It really doesn't bring substance to the table.
Mhm.
But this hearing was completely different.
Yeah.
First off, you've got three witnesses with extremely high levels of credibility,
Mhm.
of credentials. All three of them are military officers. They're patriots, and they have quite a story to tell. And they offer an interesting range. So you've got Dave Fravor, who
Mhm.
is the commander of the Red Rippers. He was the person who had the encounter with the Tic Tac off the USS Nimitz, 2004. Then you have Ryan Graves, who was working up in a practice area to deploy on USS Teddy Roosevelt off the East Coast in 2014. And now here we are in 2023, and we've got David Grush coming forward with, you know, all kinds of information about secret access programs and
Right.
things that may or may not be on the up and up.
Well, it's very different information, and I think that's why the buzz is around David, because y- as fascinating as like Ryan Graves was telling some amazing stories about cuboidal forms, with the apexes touching the sphere, this translucent sphere,
Hmm.
and this red cuboidal form moving in ways that were unpredictable, and they had sets of eyes on it, visual sets of eyes. These are all amazing stories, but this is the first time I think we've had someone really from the intelligence community outside of, gosh, I don't know. I can't think of anyone who's been this unique in the revealing of the machinations that were going on behind the scenes with the intelligence community. The fact that he was able to speak to 40 different individuals that apparently had information regarding secret access programs and CAP programs is astounding. And of course, there's some of the other insinuations, I won't say accusations, such as bodily harm done to pilots, perhaps physical harm or worse to those who had information about UAPs and were hurt because they were perhaps willing to share that information. And it was essentially the accusation there would be a cover up by some aspect of our government, whether it's
Right.
military or otherwise. And perhaps, but and everyone thinks that. But then I also thought, what if that is actually the secret access program, right? If you're hiring that third party, if you're I don't know, let's Lockheed or some other company, right? And they do the dirty work, then your hands as the government are technically clean. So I did wonder about that, and because he didn't give us specifics or names, which he says he would do in a skiff, we couldn't really garner much more. So,
Right.
what's your take on the skiff thing? Because my understanding was that they were supposed to go afterwards and into a secure location, and he was willing to share this information. And then I've heard otherwise, actually.
So I think you allude to a really good point. So David Grush not only talked to a lot of individuals, but he collected a lot of information. And then there was a process through which he was bringing that information forward. And he didn't just, he wasn't a whistleblower that just came out to the public. He's a person, he's high ranking, he's worked within the government, military, industrial structure. He's also got, the TS security clearances. So he was very smart about going to the IG. He stayed within his lane, within his military processes, goes to the IG, then goes to DOPSR. And DOPSR is the Defense Office of Pre-Publication and Security, and presents all this information. So essentially, he stayed within his security clearances, protected himself, has this information, and then lets the military come back to him and say what he can or cannot go public with. Now, surprisingly, DOPSR said he could go public with a certain amount of information, which he has.
Right.
Now, what sets Grush apart from other government people that have given us information on unique UFO sighting events, like say Bob Salas, right, or people talked about Maelstrom or even Rendlesham or things like that.
Sure.
This is the first time where a witness has come forward, and then his peers, former commanders, and other people have come forward to vouch for their credibility. I think that's very unique. And a good example of that is currently the SCU, Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, they're hosting their annual conference right now. And their keynote speaker was Admiral Tim Gallaudet. And it turns out that Tim Gallaudet worked with David Grush on programs and projects. And Tim Gallaudet eventually went on to run the NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. But he worked with David Grush, and he said right out there, he laid it right out there as keynote speaker, this guy is for real, he's the real deal, and he's 100% credible. And to have those kinds of people backing you up, and I don't know if you noticed this during the hearing, but there was somebody sitting behind David Grush, and that person was Charles McCullough. And he was the longest serving inspector general of the intelligence community. And it turns out he's working as counsel to David Grush. And David Grush, I mean, we've listened to Lou Elizondo, and Lou Elizondo has been very clear about his clearance agreements and what he can talk about, what he can't talk about. And I think David Grush was very effective in how he also walked that fine line.
Yeah,
he
very
gave us
effective.
much information as DOPSR said he could give. But once it got to a point where there was any risk of revealing anything that might be sensitive, he stopped the conversation. I'll tell you behind closed doors. I'll tell you in a skiff. Now, I don't know if people know what a SCIF is. SCIF stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility,
Mhm.
and it turns out it's actually SCIFs are actually built. I mean, they're
Oh,
um,
yeah.
yeah, they're
The,
insulated. They're
there's no
they're
electronics, no wires running through. It's like a
right.
box,
They're
basically.
shielded.
Shielded,
You
right?
know,
Yeah.
they
Hmm.
prevent electronic eavesdropping.
Hmm.
And if you get into anything, if you and I both have secret clearances, and we are going to have even just a casual conversation about
Hmm.
anything that might even border on something that we're working on or talking about that's sensitive, we need to take it to the skiff.
Right.
And I thought David Grush was very effective in how he walked that line between public and sensitive information.
Yeah, and I want to talk about Sean Kirkpatrick's memo, the
Right.
director of AARO, just in case anyone's not sure of that, um, titled "Hearings and Transparency." So there's a couple of things in here that I found a little upsetting. I kind of feel like there's some gaslighting going on here, to be honest,
Sure.
because in the third paragraph he says, as the director of Arrow's amazingly talented, devoted, and highly motivated team, however, I cannot let yesterday's hearing pass without sharing how insulting it was to the officers of the Department of Defense and intelligence community who chose to join Arrow, many with not unreasonable anxieties about the career risks this would entail, that would have been working diligently, tirelessly, and often in the face of harassment and animosity to satisfy their congressionally mandated mission. They are truth seekers as I am. Now, and it says, but you certainly would not get the impression from hearing yesterday's hearing, right? Even essentially, he's saying that David Grush
Right.
was slinging stuff at him, and that's not at all what he was doing. What
No,
David
no, he
Grush was
wasn't.
actually doing was exactly what Sean Kirkpatrick is saying here. What Grush's mission seems to be one of not just a congressional mission, but a constitutional mission.
Sure.
And I do very much get the sense from him after having seen more and more of David Grush now that, and he isn't some kind of psyops operator, because if he is, he's making a mess of the situation. But
Hmm.
two, I think he's being honest, and he cares about not only himself but others who are patriots and doing their duties to their country. They have been harassed, they have been hurt, and that's his point. So the
Yes.
idea that Sean Kirkpatrick would take that and turn it around using his own words as an attack on him, I thought that was in itself despicable. You know?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, there's a lot of factors at play here. So first off, we in ufology, we're very attuned to a lot of the historical stories, right? We know people have been threatened. We
Mhm.
know there's stories of people from Roswell that were threatened, that their bodies would never be found out in the desert, et cetera, things like that.
Mhm.
Now, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick is a very well spoken person. He's very knowledgeable. Personally, I liked some of the things he said in some of his initial testimonies in the public meetings. However, he has a different boss, right?
Mhm.
So Dr. Kirkpatrick and AARO, they report to the executive branch of government. They're part of DOD. They don't say anything the White House, the administration isn't going to be comfortable with. Grush, in this testimony that we just had, was with the legislative branch. So
Mhm.
we've got a whole separate branch of government now pushing really, really hard for um, transparency of information that chances are pretty good the executive branch doesn't want to get out there. So
Yeah.
you can see how the two sides are starting to stack up. Richard Dolan's often said there's a battle going on within the
Oh,
military
for
industrial
sure.
complex, right? Those that want the truth to come out and those that want to
Mhm.
keep the truth from the public at any cost. And I
Right.
think we're
The
starting to see that start to form.
Yeah, the factional battle. There's two factions we would assume because you have to have at least some opposing. But maybe there's a third. Maybe there's some, we don't really know. Clearly, there are people behind, and we were talking about this a little bit before we spoke. The idea that the legacy and mainstream media didn't jump on this. Like, okay, I can understand if you want to be skeptical, right? Like some, not like it used to be, but some programs still play and roll the X-Files theme, or have some kind of semi-goofy graphic, or maybe the journalist anchor person smirks. Okay, but
Yep.
these were highly qualified, respected, intelligently well-spoken individuals that weren't talking to someone on a podcast. It wasn't a 60 minutes interview. They were under oath, and these are patriots. They understand what this means, especially David Grush of all,
Hmm.
and which is, exemplary. How like you said, close to the line he got with what he could share. And how does the media not freak out and go, this is a huge story? They could still play it skeptically, right? But why not hit it hard? Get people excited about this. This is a big deal. Wow, this might be a little crazy, but this is our government in action. Check this out. It would get great ratings.
Absolutely. And look at
And
the panel.
yeah,
Look how nonpartisan the participants were on the congressional side. I mean, you had both sides there, both very much engaged in this subject matter,
yeah.
asking really good questions. I mean, they weren't softballing the questions, they were asking the good questions, and it was coming from both sides. And I heard somebody today at the SU conference, they made the comment, it is so disappointing that the media is still focused on the Biden Trump soap opera as
Right,
opposed to a subject
right.
like this that could have
Well,
ramifications for all of mankind.
considering that the subjects that we cover, I am very much, not shouldn't say adverse. I'm open-minded, but I'm a little averse to highly convoluted conspiracy theories, right?
Sure.
Because the more complicated and convoluted a conspiracy theory is, the less likely it or aspects of it are true, because then you start falling into categories of contradiction. Okay, but so here we are. It does seem odd that the media is not reporting like we think they should. We do know that there is a give and take, that journalists and these big media stations will get insider information, to share with the public anonymously. They have good solid sources, but in order to get that, they have to give something else, which means on occasion there would be a request, please not do not cover this story. And I think that that's kind of
Mhm.
what's going on here. So what
That
do you
could very
think?
well be. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, like you said before, News Nation is covering this like crazy. And my first thought, some people say, oh, it's psyops. My first thought is, no, they're a new growing station, and they are seeing their views boost like crazy.
Hmm.
So from a fiduciary perspective, if you're a shareholder of this company, you're going, let's do more of those stories, because this is good for our bottom line.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Now, there's always going to be some media outlets that are going to
Hmm.
associate this, no matter who's speaking, what their credentials are, what the security
Hmm.
clearance are. They're always going to associate with what they call the woo factor, right?
Hmm.
That this is a woo subject. They don't really want to touch it. But I think we are beyond that now. I
Yeah.
think that it's become serious. The scientific and academic communities are now involved. People are posturing now to establish their scientific credentials. We're focusing on sensors and detection. NASA's involved. NASA stood up a UAP independent study team.
Hmm.
The American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics has stood up a UAP independent integration and outreach committee. And AIAA used to be extremely involved in UAPs up till about 1973.
Hmm.
And AIAA was the first organization to actually challenge the results of the Condon report. So to see these professional engineers and scientists come back to this area of study
Yeah.
and bring serious science to the table, this is going to get very, very interesting as we go forward.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to take a moment to thank everybody for joining tonight. This is a pop up episode due to this hearing, of course. Thank you, Marty, for jumping in fairly last minute and doing this with me. I really, really
My
appreciate it, because there's
pleasure.
there's so much to digest. So I just want to say hi, Charles. Hey, Mark. Hey, Jacqueline. Hey, Aaron. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Appreciate you all. Everybody listening, thank you for supporting Coffee and UFOs. It really means a lot. So I want to get back to Sean Kirkpatrick's memo here. He also says at one point, Arrow was Okay, I'm sorry. Finally, to be clear, AARO has yet to find any credible evidence to support the allegations of any reverse engineering program for non-human technology. Also, to be clear, none of the whistleblowers from yesterday's hearing ever worked for AARO or was ever a representative to AARO, contrary to statements made in testimony and in the media. So, in my mind, he's speaking to David Grush here.
Yes, absolutely.
What is going on? Is he saying David is lying? Because we know that David represented the NGO and was it NRO as well, or was it just the
National Geospatial Intelligence Agency.
that okay,
Yeah.
that's who he was representing specifically.
Right.
Okay.
And he was the representative interfacing with originally the UAP task force.
Right.
Then he said eventually becoming AARO. And I think that's what Dr. Kirkpatrick took exception to. He might very well have had the responsibility to do that,
Yeah.
but given the timing of how these things have played out, he may
Mhm.
not have actually had any interaction with AARO, even though he may have had the responsibility. There could have been other staffers that actually may have interfaced with AARO at the time, because there's a short time frame between the formation of AARO and where we are today.
But see, now my understanding was that Grush reported to AARO, or though
He
not.
was more like an interface. I don't think
Mhm.
he actually was responsible to provide them with anything specific.
Okay.
At least that wasn't detailed, at least the reports that I've read.
Well, and you actually wrote a do you mind if I read your recommendations to improve acquisition and management of aviation related
Sure.
UAP data? Okay. So
Sure.
this manuscript you co-authored with John M. Platt, John Michael Gutierrez, Ted Rowe, Ryan Graves, and you actually look at the very thing that Ryan Graves was talking about during the hearing, and that's the reporting systems and
Yes.
how to best report and you know bring together all the data in a way that is meaningful. So when you were listening to Ryan Graves speaking during the hearing,
Yes.
what were you thinking? What was going on in your head?
Well, full disclosure, I technically work for Ryan Graves. Since he stood up the AIAA UAP IOC,
Hmm.
I'm the Civil Aviation Team Leader, and I'm part of the outreach committee in that organization. Now, Ryan's a pilot, I'm a pilot, there's a whole group of pilots, and Ted Rowe, one of the co-authors, is one of the co-directors of NARCAP, which is the National Aviation Reporting Center for Anomalous Phenomena. And they have a long history of documenting aviation related UAP sightings and the impacts to pilots, to aircraft, et cetera. The first thing we realized is when we evaluate how UAPs impact air safety is
Hmm.
how does a pilot report? And if you were to just, pull a commercial pilot and say, hey, if you saw a UAP, what would you do?
Right.
And the first thing he would say was, well, I'm not going to report that. I'm not telling anybody about it. And then if you go to the FAA documentation, because they do
Hmm.
provide guidance to pilots for reporting, the FAA documentation is very superficial. It's very light. It just says report to a civilian UAP reporting center. That means pilots could report to NARCAP, MUFON,
Anywhere.
API, Enigma Labs. I mean, there's actually about a dozen different areas. The
Right.
problem is that data gets lost because there's thousands of UAP sighting reports. Like mine, right? I'm walking down the street, I look up, I see something, I file a
Hmm.
report. There's thousands of reports like that. But what AIAA and other organizations, and especially Aero right now, they're focused on these aviation related reports, the
Yeah.
ones that are going on the military training areas, and also the ones, with civil aviation. I mean, if you think about it, a military aircraft may have two souls on board, but a commercial airline could have up to 500 people on board. What's the impact to them if
Right.
they lose
Yeah.
their guidance system, or
Hmm.
something electromagnetic causes a system failure? What's the impact of that?
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, it hasn't happened to a serious degree, but there are incidents that are made of record. But where do these organizations go to get that information?
Right. Well, in your report here, you also mentioned different organizations like MUFON and NICAP and that sort of thing,
Sure.
um, or NUFORC, not NICAP.
New fork.
Like
Yeah.
NICAP, yeah,
Yeah.
no longer.
NARCAP's in there as well.
NARCAP is in there as well, right?
Right.
But if the information and the data collected from these reports,
Yes.
whether it be civilian pilots, airline pilots, or military pilots, it was not easy to extract that information
No.
specifically for those types of incidents. Why is it important to separate that from the rest of the civilian reporting systems?
So, and that's a great question, and this is what it comes down to. The stakeholders, and I consider our stakeholders to be AARO, to be the NASA UAP independent study team.
Hmm.
These are the top of the mountain people that are really looking at this phenomenon, and they've actually publicly stated their requirements. They say we need better data.
Hmm.
And if you look over the last 50 years, who holds all the data? It's MUFON, it's NUFORC, it's
Hmm.
NARCAP. They have all the data. Unfortunately, when they brought the scientific and academic communities into the mix,
Hmm.
there's a lot of horsepower, a lot of great credentials, a lot of great knowledge there.
Yeah.
But a lot of those organizations don't consider the ufology groups that have been collecting the data as scientific in their methods. So
Mm.
therefore, they're trying to, how do we get better data? What's the right system to do that? So our paper, the group of us got together, pilots, non-pilots. We had Ted Rowe from NARCAP, who had all the historical information. We said,
Hmm.
what is the best solution that would meet the stakeholder requirements? And basically, what we did is, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick said, the best solution would be one that not only gets the data, but leverages an already existing system, so we aren't creating something from scratch.
Hmm.
And we looked at the systems out there, and we decided that there's a process called the Aviation Safety Reporting System. And Ryan Graves brought this up during the hearing. ASRS is a system currently used by pilots to report accidental infractions to federal regulations. It's like, I'm flying, I broke this rule, I didn't mean to.
Hmm.
But if
Hmm.
I self-report to the system, the FAA says that's a good behavior. That's a safety-driven behavior. We're not going to
Okay.
punish you
Hmm.
for it. We're just going to keep it as a matter of record.
Hmm.
But what they've done is they've established a platform. NASA administers it, the FAA funds it, but they have a platform that's fully supported, that's fully administered, that generates analytics, the statistics
I
on
see.
what's reported.
Okay.
And then they expanded it to include drones, UAS.
Hmm.
And when we looked at the UAS part of that system,
Hmm.
it's a small step to go to UAP.
Okay. So,
And we
so
right, and we can give pilots a recognized confidential system where they could actually safely go to report UAP sightings. And
so
that was the
essen-
paper.
so essentially, the five of you, your assessment was that system, the ASRS,
Yes.
Aviation Safety Reporting System, is the best that we have currently. Is it?
Right.
Can it be improved, or is it already set up to be perfectly utilized for UAP as well?
No, it's perfect. So it's a four-step process that we've identified. The first one is we need a platform. We
Hmm.
need a host. And that was ASRS because they already have the platform in place.
Hmm.
The second part of the process was to create what is the gold standard for a report template.
Hmm.
We actually looked at all the different organizations. We have a team that's actually benchmarking, I believe, like 8 different templates, plus the requirements as stated by Dr. Kirkpatrick from Aero.
Hmm.
From that team, we expect to get basically a straw man draft of what the ideal reporting template would look like. We would hand that to NASA to put in their ASRS system. And the neat thing is, we're all volunteers. It's zero cost to the
Yeah.
taxpayers,
Yeah.
right? We're doing this for free. We just want it to be the best, most effective system out there.
Hmm.
And so, but we're still trying to convince them that this is a great idea, right? You know how government is. It's like,
Sure.
okay, we got to think about this, and then we got to get it funded.
So is the idea to get this into Arrow's eyesight so that they can help to implement this program? Because the idea of the uh bringing together a sharing of information from different departments, from the Navy, the DoD,
Hmm.
intel community, and have a centralized system where they can share reports.
Yes, that
It,
would be ideal.
that
The
could the ASRS wouldn't really be that. ASRS would just be the collection of aviation specifically,
Yes, yes.
and then you would still need to bring that into a more centralized committee, right?
So the ASRS would be centralized for all civilian aviation. So that would be your general aviation pilots, your
Mhm.
commercial airline pilots, would be your air traffic controllers, your airport facility personnel. Bringing
But
Aero into it, the complication with Aero is Aero specifically focuses on DoD and military reports. A lot of those reports, because they involve specific sources and methods,
mhm.
they go classified. So they have their own process for getting those reports.
Okay.
And when Aero reports on their statistics,
Mhm.
we had 144 initially, we identified one. Now they were up to 500. Now they're up to 800. Those are military specific reports with, I believe, some historical FAA garnished reports as well.
Well, I mean, our takeaway from the hearing certainly was loud and clear that personnel and safety, right, and
Yes.
and national security safety. So, to my mind, if you're Arrow, you would want the information from the ASRS, because that's still applicable to
Oh,
your
yeah, absolutely.
your analysis. You need to
Sure.
understand what's going on in the skies, whether it's a civilian airplane, or an F-18, whatever it is. So all that's really important. So do you see Arrow moving in that direction? Do you see a sincere path there?
Oh, absolutely. The
Okay.
best thing about ASRS is it's public facing. So any organization could actually get reports from the ASRS staff, statistical reports, sighting type reports.
Hmm.
Um, and Arrow could definitely get that, that population of sighting reports to add to their data that they collect. It
Hmm.
just doesn't go the other way, right? If unless Arrow declassifies the reports they receive, they wouldn't make it to ASRS. But we have discussed a way of maybe sanitizing those reports so they could flow into
That's
ASRS
right.
so that everybody gets the big picture, right?
Exactly, and I think that was brought up during the hearing as well.
Yes. It's just
How
complicated, but they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, there was a great question. I can't remember who asked it, uh, but the question was, can we go back 20 years and look at those reports? I mean, is that old enough that we should be able to look at those UFO and UAP reports? And Grush's response was like, sure, just as long as there's nothing that's national security compromising
Right.
in the data. But then that's the problem. We've seen the blacked out pages for decades, so
Right.
you can
Right.
always use that excuse, right? You can always just black something out and say, well, it's a national security issue, and that's the problem. So my fear is that we're going to kind of circle back and bump our head up against the wall in that process, and that's why this having them testify under oath, particularly Grush in this instance, about having direct knowledge of particular departments, within organizations that are actually,
Yes.
in possession of potentially craft or biologics, that are non-human origin. That's the key. That's the ticket. Because if we don't get that, we could just end up going back in circles again, as we have
Sure.
for so long. So the Congress, the panel, they need to follow up right on this and investigate that. How realistic is it that they'll be able to get anywhere with that? How much power does the subcommittee have to
Yeah,
move in?
that's a great question because the best way to hide anything is to give it to a defense contractor, right?
Mhm,
Because then the defense contractor isn't subject to FOIA.
mhm,
I mean, you literally almost have to subpoena the information to get it out of a defense contractor. And within
mhm,
defense contractors, we talk about levels of security. When you're working for a private company and you
mhm,
get information from a prime, let's say a Boeing or a Lockheed or whatever, they could actually bury it in multiple levels. It could be a subcontractor to a major contractor. that's a supplier to a customer like NavAir, the U.S. Navy, the
Mhm.
U.S. Army, the Air Force, and you can just keep bearing it in different levels, and then they compartmentalize it within those levels.
Mhm.
So in these different levels of protection, they range anything from a simple copyright to consider something proprietary, company proprietary,
Right.
to a program you might have to be read into. It may not necessarily be classified, but you have to go
Mhm.
through a communication security training, get read into it, to requiring an actual security clearance. And
Sure.
I've processed for one of those. It's not easy. You fill out a 100-page application. You put in your whole family history. Uh, it's very, very detailed and in depth. You go through they do a personal investigation. They talk to your neighbors. They talk to your family members. And eventually, if everything comes up clean, you get issued a
Mhm.
security clearance. And that security clearance doesn't just come to you and all of a sudden you can't talk about secret stuff anymore. There are all kinds of restrictions with that. Anytime you travel outside the country, you got to declare it ahead of time. I mean, there's a lot of considerations involved when you hold a security clearance, and
Sure.
that's why I applaud people like Lou Elizondo and David Grush for walking that line because it's stressful. I mean, it's stressful to hold the clearance. There's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of complication to it. A lot of people say, "Oh, he just wants to take it to closed session because he doesn't want to tell anybody about it." No, if there's things that are revealed, even if you reveal them accidentally and you violate
Mhm.
your clearance, you could still be prosecuted for that. So it's very, very important that that your head's in the game when you're talking about sensitive information.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Well, two things I want to say. So one, I made kind of a humorous post about it on social media, referencing to Independence Day, the movie. But
Mhm.
during the hearings, there was that conversation about, well, how is something like this funded? It's like, well, misappropriation of funds. Money is supposed to go here. It turns up over in this program instead.
Right.
Um, and then I thought about Independence Day, where he says he doesn't really think it's $50,000 for a hammer, $300,000 for a toilet seat, do you? And there's something to that.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
every once in a while we get that report that says, "Oh, there's money missing. We don't know where it is." Wink, wink, right? And I think we all know that somebody knows where that money is. Money leaves a trail; it doesn't just disappear. So the second thing was to your point about investigating and getting access to a private company that has its own protections outside of the government structure. What I'm picking up a little bit is a change in the narrative of sharing information about UFO or UAP is a national security issue to not sharing information about UAP and UFOs is a security issue. Now,
Mhm.
so if members of Congress can run with that narrative and find a way in legalese to give them a path to then have the right to send who I don't know the FBI in, just like they did with Trump and Mar-a-Lago, right? Like, okay, we have enough evidence to suggest that you have information that you probably shouldn't have because it's a national security issue, and maybe they can go and knock on their doors. That's if you can make that argument. Do you think it's feasible to make that argument?
Yeah, it's so the drive now is for accountability and transparency, right? They need oversight.
Hmm.
So what David Grush refers to as misappropriating of funds is probably accurate at the top level. Once those funds get into the private sector, it's not really misappropriating funds, it's reappropriating funds, right? It's where you allocate that money.
Hmm.
They might say, we need you to reverse engineer something.
Loopholes or
You're
whatever. Yeah.
working on
Hmm.
5 other legit programs. We're just going to boost the budgets there. We want you to flow some of the IRAD monies into, your reverse engineering program.
Hmm.
It's just so compartmentalized and it gets so diffused. Uh, I really, I would love to see somebody come to the table and say, yes, we've had these programs,
Hmm.
but honestly, so for instance, let's take let's speculate and say Roswell was real,
Okay.
right?
Hmm.
Okay, I'm not. I don't want to insult anybody. I'm not insinuating it's not real. I'm just saying, for the sake of this conversation, we're going to assume Roswell is real. At that time, the knowledge of having an exotic craft and exotic technology absolutely had to go deep. And the
Hmm.
reason being is we not only had to protect it from Soviet spies, we literally had to protect it from our friends, our allies. At that time, England was selling jet engines to the Soviets. So we really didn't have a good read on who were our true allies and who were convenient allies at the time. And if we're the only ones with that exotic technology, think about the
Hmm.
strategic advantage that could possibly offer. So it
Sure. Yeah.
made total sense to go deep, right?
Hmm.
Nowadays, and I almost think this is kind of where this gets very chaotic. I almost think Rush kind of caused problems for disclosure, because I always envision disclosure as admission that there's non-human intelligence out there. We're not alone. And then down the road, possibly, oh yeah, and by the way, we've got crash recoveries and we've got biologicals.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Grush has taken us right over that first step and right into the crash recoveries and biologicals. And that is the technology is what we want to protect most. I often made a prediction. I said, I know when we're going to learn the truth about Roswell and about exotic technology and crash retrievals. I know
Hmm.
when they're going to actually come to the table and tell us about it. And that's when our own technology, our own existing technology,
Hmm.
equals or exceeds the technology that was recovered.
Right, and that's the argument that they can make now.
Hmm.
Still, let's say Congress does find a way to get a little bit closer to those secret access programs, and a couple of members discover, oh, this is real. Well, maybe someone from that department says, look, we still haven't quite cracked the reverse engineering of this. If you release this technology now, then everyone else on the planet will one know it's possible, and suddenly tons of money and effort and creative thinking will go in that direction, because we know that's just how the human mind works. Once we realize something's possible, boom, like all of a sudden it starts cropping up everywhere. um, and then two, then if depending on how much you release, you're just handing that information over to potential adversaries. I mean, and we wouldn't do that with any other advanced technology of our own making anyway. So does that put us in a conundrum?
It
Are we
does.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there,
No, no,
but
good.
you triggered a thought. So let's say we have this exotic technology.
Mhm.
Let's say the Chinese have it, the Russians have it, but our other allies don't have it, right? It's going to be a sticking point for every negotiation going forward. They're going to want access to it. They're going to want to see it. And it's going to just break down all our diplomatic relations until we're on an equal playing field, right?
Yeah.
Until that
Mhm.
technology is shared and the information is shared. So it's a precipice.
Mhm.
It does create a conundrum. What do
Well,
we do? And the other aspect is what uh, Dave Fravor and Ryan Graves said during the hearing when they were asked, if what you encountered was hostile, would you be in a
mhm.
position to defend yourselves? And they said, absolutely not.
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
idea is,
Yeah.
if you're in the hottest jet the U.S. Navy has, the most
Mhm.
capable combat platform we have, and you're not in a position to defend yourself,
Mhm.
and that hits the widespread population that there might be a superior species out there,
Yeah.
people are going to panic and start hoarding toilet paper.
Right. Here's the thing. So Ryan Graves, mentioned that in 2014, 2015, they had systems upgrades, and that's when pilots started seeing on their systems these
Hmm.
UAP. That was 2015. Last year, we had what was obviously from the pictures that we saw a weather balloon that we let drift cross continental over the United States before
Hmm.
we shut it down. And then we had apparently encountered two other UAPs. We don't know anything else really about them.
I think it's so classified.
And what we were told was part of this story was that uh, they were noticed because of turning on additional sensors, or essentially the same thing Ryan Graves is saying. They kind of
Yeah, turning off filters.
turning off filters. There, thank you.
Right. Hmm.
And so, okay, now if all of our decades of experience with sensors and filters and our military hasn't learned that we can see different things when we turn on or upgrade system filters and that's where I'm lost. I'm like, what? That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. The learning.
So yeah, how can you possibly not understand that, right? I mean, Ryan Graves experienced that in
Hmm.
2014, and suddenly you're just discovering now, oh, look at that. We changed our
Well,
filter and then boom, something showed up. So
so
that,
it goes
yeah.
back to 2004. So if
Hmm.
we go back to the Nimitz encounter with the Tic Tac, the Spy 1 radars on the Princeton were actually upgraded before the deployment.
Hmm.
That's why people like Kevin Day and the radar crews on the Princeton were able to track these objects because they
Hmm.
had that upgrade. Commander Fravor mentioned that when he was engaged, he had the APG 73 radar in his F 18 and did not see any of them on radar. He was not able to pick up the Tic Tac on radar.
Hmm.
Now, the F 18s were upgraded from APG 73 to APG 79, which is a completely different generation technology type radar. And then Ryan Graves said, "Oh, we're seeing all this stuff. We actually thought it was a software bug within the radars,
Right.
and then when they realized it wasn't a bug, and then they're starting to have actual visual,
Hmm.
contact with these objects, and now because they are learning about sensor technologies, everybody is focusing on detection. There's a group within the AIAA that's
Hmm.
looking at methods of detection. You've got UAP data, you've got Sky 360, you've got a lot
Hmm.
of private companies now that are looking at UFO detection systems. We have a MADAR process with a
Yeah.
MADAR net. So people are, I think, really trying to focus on what do we need to do to really track these objects.
Right. Well, and the Madar is great. I mean, I'm familiar with it because of MUFON. There's a report every month in the newsletter. And for anybody listening, the Madar is essentially a civilian uh, program, right? I
Right.
mean, you can get the device and attach it to your home, and it has sensors, and that data is collected. Let's say there's a UFO, and you know, it passes by. It picks up electromagnetic disturbance in the atmosphere or whatever it is, and then you have this, a collection of nearby effects, right? And then you can kind of look at that and make a decision assessment of what the object might have been. So
Right.
that brings us to the topic of, in the end, is it going to be the civilian sector that's going to get this thing disclosed? By the time we get through this, as exciting as this is and as fast as this seems to be going, are we going to have
Yes.
the breakthrough first before?
That could very well happen because that
Mhm.
actually came up in a conversation, and I can't recall the venue, but I was listening to people discuss it, that maybe we're getting all of these whistleblowers coming forward now, and this kind of dichotomy within the military where one segment wants to be transparent and one segment wants to hold on the information because maybe they're realizing they're at the end of being able to keep this secret with the
Mhm.
internet, with the information sharing, with the
Mhm.
sensor technologies. Even in the civilian sector, sensor technologies are advancing to a point where we're going to be able to start detecting these things if we aren't already. Like you mentioned, MADAR.
Mhm.
MADAR has also tied into what's called Project Match with MUFON, where they're
Mhm.
correlating MADAR hits with actual sighting reports, and
Yeah.
they're getting some very interesting results.
Right, and yeah, that collection of data, the correlation is building and building. Madar was initially wasn't it designed in 1976?
Yeah, it goes
Some
back quite a way.
some
They're in
something like
their like
that.
third generation of MADAR.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's
Yeah,
getting less expensive too. That's the thing. The
sure.
technology is less expensive, so you have more people. It's like NASA has amateur astronomers working from home, right? I forget what the name of that system is, where it's all tied in, and you can star watch and report, um,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
astronomical events. Um, okay, so losing track a little bit, but I want to go back to
Yeah.
we go
So much to cover.
there is in the hearing,
Yes.
the Fravor and Graves had talked about radar data and the like, and how that's missing. They really want that data because they had their own onboard sensors, and they had their visual confirmation of an object, but they didn't have the radar to sort of compare, right, and supplement that data. Why do they not have the radar, and is that something that Congress could get around and getting?
That's a great question. I mean, why does this data keep getting collected by unidentifiable figures?
Where,
I mean,
where
I'd
is
love
that going? It's going into a black hole, right?
it is,
Yeah.
and somebody knows where it's going, right?
Hmm.
It's either got to be CIA,
Hmm.
some intelligence agency is collecting that information for some purpose. I don't know if it's to maintain secrecy.
Hmm.
Uh, there's still the possibility that a portion of what's being seen is our advanced technology.
Hmm.
I'm sure it doesn't account for all of it because there's just, there's um, characteristics, the five observables that TTSA gave us. We're
Hmm.
seeing objects demonstrate performance that we just can't match, signature management that we
Yeah.
can't do yet. But, so who knows?
Yeah. I'm going to bring this up really quick. Actually, no, let me bring this comment up from Charles. So Charles Smar says civilian radar software was set to filter out objects that were moving too fast decades ago,
Yes.
um,
And or too small, you
and or
know,
too small.
yes. And
So
or
if
too slow actually as well. The filters, if you're tracking jet
interesting.
aircraft and
Hmm.
you turn your radar filter so that you delete out anything moving, let's say less than 30 miles an hour, then you're not going to pick up one of these, slow moving monstrous triangles that have been seen over the Hudson Valley.
Right. Yeah. Hudson Valley. I'm glad you brought that up.
So
Because that,
kind of share a little learning experience.
yeah.
Becoming a drone pilot, I took some drone training we have a drone training center in New York State and a
Hmm.
drone corridor where they're evaluating drone integration into the airspace management system. And they said, we have radar so sensitive we can pick up, birds because they're tracking smaller drones, through this corridor.
Uh-huh.
Come
Yeah.
to realize all they did is took their filters off. They didn't have a new special
It
radar. They
wasn't a
just
new,
had a
right.
radar, right, where they took the filters off so they could track the smaller objects.
Yeah, good point, Charles. Thank you for that comment. Thanks, Marty, for
Mm.
clarifying that. So we have to touch on Grush's mention of biologics. Now, you just said earlier, you indicated that you may not believe in the Roswell crash. I, for
No,
one,
no, no, no. I
oh, I'm
think
sorry. Oh,
I'm a huge fan of Don Schmidt, and I think he's uncovered enough evidence to say that there's a pretty good chance that was a pretty anomalous event.
okay. That's where I am. That's where I am in general
Yeah.
as well.
No,
Yes.
I was just offering that up for the basis of the conversation.
Okay. So all right. Biologics. What do you think he was alluding to there?
Well, I think some of these at some point in time had pilots. I think a lot of what we're seeing now are probably autonomous, just like we're going to more autonomous systems.
Hmm.
We've long recognized that the weakness in our current advanced aircraft designs is the pilot. Our physical
Hmm.
bodies just can't withstand the forces that our current aircraft, are able to pull in a dogfight or especially with fifth gen type fighters. So at some point, the cockpits go away and it becomes autonomous or AI driven type systems.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it still holds true. People have said they've, you know, observed these objects and believe they're under intelligence control. It just might be artificial intelligence control. We don't know.
You know what I thought was really an astute comment or observation shared by David Grush. Oftentimes in these podcasts about UFOs, the question comes up, if they're so advanced, why are they crashing?
Mhm.
How can they crash so many times? That's ridiculous. You're telling me they can go galactic travel, and yet whoops, they crash in Corona, New Mexico.
Right.
Um, and then Alamogordo next. And it seems a bit odd, right? How's that possible? He made the point that okay, look at us humans. What's our most advanced technology in transportation? Maybe a supersonic jet, let's say, right? Or airplanes. We have cars. We've been using them for decades, right? Over 100 years, and
Hmm.
so why do we still crash them?
Right.
We should be masters at this. Why are we still crashing them? And so, if this other next tier, assuming they're more intelligent, they may not be. They just may be more advanced than us technologically. So just because that are a higher tier of technology doesn't mean that they're not capable of accidents, of making mistakes. I thought
Sure.
that was a really good analogy to kind of to clarify that, because I think there's this sort of, even with the skeptics, there's a sort of a godlike expectation of these beings that are visiting extraterrestrially, um, for no other reason than the assumption that they are somehow imperfect and perfect.
Hey, they've lost a
Which
couple of ships on Star Trek too, so
right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought that was just really, really helpful, and I think for the general public, and
Yes.
especially for the debunker and the skeptic,
Yeah.
because they
It put it
often bring that up a lot too.
right. It put it
Yeah.
into a really good context. I mean, if you think
Hmm.
about it, our most sophisticated aircraft right now is likely the B-2 stealth bomber. We lost one of those
Hmm.
when we first developed the F-117 stealth, and we crashed all three of the development aircraft.
Hmm.
I mean, many of the prototypes for a lot of these aircraft or the early production models of aircraft do crash. Roswell is interesting because of some of the background stories. If it's true the Los Alamos was deploying a new prototype radar system to protect that area, and if you think about that area of the country, we
Hmm.
had our only nuclear capable bomber squadron there. We had our nuclear reserve there. Our nuclear arsenal was there, and we had Los Alamos Lab there developing the technology. Obviously, we'd want to protect it. And if we put our newest radars there, who's to say that the directed energy from those old radars wasn't enough to cause some kind of malfunction or mess up on part of the craft? Don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of great questions. I'd love to know the answers.
Right. And maybe some, like Charles Smart was saying, maybe some of these uh, ships are, maybe they're like drones for these extraterrestrials, and they're in their mind they're disposable. It's kind of like, oh, if it crashes, it's not the end of the world for them. Uh,
Right.
right. So we can't make assumptions. All we could do is look at what we know or think that we know. Was there anything else from the hearing that you took away that you really think is important that we haven't touched on?
Well, let's see. So you asked me about some pros and cons. So I just kind of did a little summary.
Hmm.
So for the pros, what I thought, we had the highest level of credentialed and credible witnesses assembled to date, which I thought was historic in itself.
Hmm.
All of them had security clearances and knowledgeable about detection and tracking systems. With Ryan Graves and Dave Fravor, their tracking systems on board their aircraft would be what would be the secret, um, or secure, sensitive type information.
Hmm.
We talked about the radar upgrades, which I thought was key and verified. One thing, kind of going back to Sean Kirkpatrick's or referring to Sean Kirkpatrick's memo that actually came out of the hearing, was a thought. I think the Nimitz Tic Tac sighting, if you listen to what the stakeholders consider to be the best or highest quality sighting report, I actually think the Tic Tac sighting is exactly what they've asked for. It's multi-witness, multi-sensor, multi-location sighting report.
Hmm.
And before Kirkpatrick throws any more stones, I think AARO should take the Tic Tac sighting from 2004, do a full deep dive investigation
Just
into it,
focus. Hmm.
and tell us what they think it is.
Yeah. So in a sense, put all your resources into that, or,
Sure,
or most of your resources into that. Just really dig down. Okay. So Mick West,
as
of
a
course, would
pilot.
say
Yeah,
it's a misinterpretation of the sensors, or the or parallaxing,
yeah,
or there is
yeah, or non-calibrated sensors or
non-calibrated sensors,
whatever.
or the and
Yeah.
at one and in the Tic Tac, to be fair, maybe you can clarify. So it looks like it zooms in on the object, and that creates the illusion of it speeding off to the left. Is Mick West correct on that particular moment
Well, I
of
think
the
they
video?
mixed the videos up because Um, I'm not sure if that is technically the Tic Tac. And they talked about
It's
zooming
not.
in on it. And they
Yeah,
saw two
yeah.
uh,
It's not the gimbal. I
extensions
know
off the
that.
bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know it's not the gimbal, but they had originally they called it. There was gimbal,
Hmm.
there was go fast, and I'm
Maybe it
trying to
was
think
the
of what
Go
the third
Fast,
one.
because Go Fast did look like a Tic Tac as well,
It
though.
did, it
Yeah,
did,
yeah.
right? Yeah, and the gimbal has a lot more information behind it, which a lot of people aren't privy to.
Right.
Some other pros, very important. All the testimony
Hmm.
is now public record.
I love it. Yeah.
And the fact that it was such a nonpartisan topic. I mean,
Hmm.
I was blown away by the representation of the congressional members and the quality of the questions they asked. I thought that was just the best to date. Um, some cons.
Hmm.
Um, I mentioned that I think the Grush testimony creates a problem for disclosure for the reasons that I talked about, jumping right to exotic tech and biologicals. I believe the disclosure path, if we're heading in that direction, needs to be very carefully thought through.
Hmm.
And I hate to say this, but with most government efforts, the intention is good and the execution is bad. So, I hope they really think this one through before they pull any triggers.
I'm with you on that. Okay.
And then the last thing is, we didn't see some really key heavyweight figures that I thought would have been there, such as Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, Marco
Hmm.
Rubio, or Ted Cruz. I know they're very busy. I know they sit on multiple committees. They probably let their um, coworkers carry the ball on this one. But before the hearing, they were all very instrumental in different advocacies to move this ball forward for UAP.
Yeah, and the great thing about this hearing, though, is someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was there, and I I was very impressed with her questions because
Hmm.
it was clear she didn't want to talk about aliens, right? But
Right.
she used the opportunity smartly to take the subject seriously, but really was like, where do I go? Right? That was on
That
all
was
the
great.
Congress members'
Right.
mind. Where do we go? How do we find out this information?
Yes.
Where's that money going? Because for her, that's and like a lot of senators and members of Congress, their fight for their constituents is how is our money being spent.
Hmm.
And I thought that was a
Absolutely.
great. It reminded me of like when you're investigating, a mob, and you're trying to get to the boss, right? You may not be able to get them for murder, but if you can follow the money trail and get them for tax evasion, right? Then you've got something, and you can work your way in from there. And maybe that's it. Maybe that'll be the key.
Right. And one kind of thought I'd like to leave everybody with too is, even though there's money that's being poured into these secret access programs,
Hmm.
it's not wasted money. I'm sure we're leveraging technology and all kinds of other industries, and
Hmm.
all of that money creates jobs. I got into a conversation on LinkedIn with somebody, and it said the space program is a waste of money. We should be spending it on medical research. And I'm like, well, they give NASA this budget, but that budget filters into the entire country.
Sure.
And there
Yeah.
are machine shops and packaging companies and widget manufacturers that all get a piece of that, that
Hmm.
keeps their people employed, their benefits flowing, and everything else. Uh, what we have to be careful of is that a group like the military industrial complex doesn't become too strong,
Hmm.
because they have a vested interest. They make consumable products that kill people. And if those products aren't being consumed, they don't make money. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but we seem to be really good at staying in conflicts rather than solving conflicts or ending conflicts. We just seem to propagate them. And I'm
Yeah.
sure the military industrial complex benefits from that.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that the oversight committee is upset because their job is to have oversight on these, the military, on and yes, secret access programs. They should have some oversight if they're
Sure.
contracting out. If we're contracting out, that's taxpayer money, whether it ends up in a private company's hand or not. And so it seems to me that there really isn't a committee or a board or anyone that's overlooking this. Otherwise, we
Sure.
wouldn't even have had the hearing on Wednesday. So that's concerning. And how long has that been going on? when we think of this kind of structure, often we think about the X-Files, the kind of, smoky room.
Right,
Well,
right.
now it's smoke free, but
Right.
some insiders, which would be a mixture of military, government, and private business people around a table, making the decisions on this subject. Um, to be honest, that's the only way I could possibly think it actually working when you don't have official governmental oversight of such programs. I mean,
Sure, sure.
but
And if
you do need people working together to coordinate and make it work.
so, if you
Yeah.
read any of the NDAAs, the National Defense Appropriation Acts,
Hmm.
that is Congress telling all the different, you know, agencies within government how you can spend that money for the safety and security of this country.
Yeah.
And if they're spending money outside of that, I think that's what has them concerned
Yeah.
because they are accountable for those monies, right? They're accountable to us, the American people and the taxpayers. And if money is being diverted, they should at least know why, how, where it's going, what it's
Hmm.
doing, and what kind of results can they expect for that investment.
Legally, but I don't understand. I'm trying to, and maybe it'll make more sense next year after the 2024, NDAA goes through. But if the whistleblowers are supposed to have protection,
Mhm.
how are they being denied a skiff? Um, so, which is to say, does that protection only apply if they go to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, right, through AARO, or can they go to an oversight committee instead, and share? Because it seems to me that on the one hand, Kirkpatrick's saying, "Well, they haven't come to me. David Grush hasn't come to me." Well, if David Grush had felt like he had full protection under the law, why wouldn't he
Yep.
go to AARO? Why, go through a congressional committee?
It makes you wonder. He mentioned about suffering some administrative terrorism, and it makes you
Hmm.
wonder if one way they're going to keep him from sharing information is to suspend or revoke his security clearance.
Hmm.
Then, if he's not TS cleared, he can't go into a skiff, and then he
But
can't share the information.
yeah, but that's the thing, because
Yep.
if you're supposed to be getting protection, whistleblower protection, then it
Agreed.
shouldn't matter, right?
Well, no, no, it's two separate things. Protecting you, preventing retribution,
Hmm.
for coming forward, but limiting what you're able to come forward with. That's why he was very smart to go to DOPSR.
Well, oh no, so I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I should be more clear. I'm thinking in terms if you have firsthand experience with, because in the lettering
Hmm.
for next year would be if you are in possession of material, right? That's a
Right,
non-Earth
right.
non-Earth origin, that you're protected under the law, right? So, if you have that information, on the one hand, it's saying bring it forward, but on the other hand, like you're saying, if it's a national security issue and you don't have a clearance to bring it forward, what do you do? Where do you fall in that?
Right, right. Well, if you don't have a clearance to begin with and you're privy to something, that creates its own kind of problem. Uh, you know,
Well, clearances
how
can
how
be
did you
can be
get top secret information and you don't have a clearance,
well, you could have
right?
had clearance at one time, right? But then you don't.
True, true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
When you
yeah. That's it's going to be very interesting. But I think it's if he's gone to the IG and he's gone to DOPSR, I
Mhm,
highly doubt they're going to mess with his clearances. It's just
mhm.
it would just bring too much scrutiny, I think, on whoever's trying to limit the information flow.
Um, Last question.
Sure.
Do you think that we will see more people follow up uh, behind Grush, more whistleblowers? And will it be this year or will it be next year after the 2024 NDAA goes through?
I think we will, and I don't want to just say because of David Grush. I think
Hmm.
we're seeing whistleblowers because of Lou Elizondo.
Hmm. True.
I think
Yep.
he really opened the door.
Hmm.
I think that probably helped encourage David Grush to move forward with, revealing what he's revealed.
Hmm.
Whistleblowers are coming forward. Dr. Stephen Greer has been actively sending messaging out to encourage whistleblowers to come forward.
Mhm.
And he's got a legal team that's working with whistleblowers. He just had another disclosure conference where some whistleblowers gave testimony there, and it was really quite revealing. I mean, it was quite surprising. And a couple of his whistleblowers weren't military; they were actually defense contractors.
Mhm.
So I think there's
So there
another group that can come forward.
that would be great. Getting them under oath is I think is the ticket. And I have always uh, defended Lou Elizondo. I understand in some of the interviews he said some things that may seem kind of contradictory, but when you're in that position of having information, you want to share information. Maybe you shared something you thought, oh, maybe I need to back that up a little bit. It's a tricky place to be. But let's be honest. I mean, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for Lou and ATIP.
Right.
That's just the fact of the matter. And so, we should respect that. And I think it made sense. Lou kind of he did his thing. He kind of
Hmm.
plowed the road a little bit,
Right.
got out of the way. Now you have other people coming in and plowing the road a little bit more, and then hopefully little by little you have a clear path for the deepest of the insiders with this direct knowledge information. I'm optimistic. Are you optimistic that we'll
Oh,
get disclosure?
I'll tell you, after the hearing, I
Hmm.
pretty much was doing the happy dance. And I can tell you who else was doing the happy dance, and that
I
was
was.
Bob Lazar.
That's true. That is so
You know?
true.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I mean, do you believe Bob Lazar was there in S4 and saw what
I
he saw?
I don't think somebody comes up with that level of detail
Hmm.
of things just to create a hoax.
Yeah.
And the government has a very effective disinformation, tactic and program. They keep all of us guessing. Richard Doty is a great example. I watch Richard Doty give interviews and stuff, and honestly, I don't know whether to trust him or not. He's already proven to be one of the, disinfo guys, and
Hmm.
now you don't know, is he really coming clean, or is he still playing the disinfo game, and to what end? Don't know. I mean, it's
I mean,
a
yeah.
very effective tactic.
Well, Rick Doty is, when I was thinking about David Grush, like who would fit into that category, you could make the argument it would be Rick Doty, but he hasn't gone under oath, right? And he hasn't
True.
gone that route. So I think that if Rick Doty were to step forward and be a part of that whistleblowing under oath, that wow, I mean that would blow the roofs off of so many ufology enthusiasts and researchers because I think in a way it would kind of clear the deck and
True.
and just
True.
say, look, I'm not doing a psyop thing anymore. This is the truth. My impression of Rick Doty has always been that he did have a sense of remorse. He for some of his actions. I get it.
Yes.
I've been young and done things and gone, and when I got older, I go, man, I was stupid. Or I thought I was doing it for the right reason at the time, and that happens. And he
Oh, it
was working for
does.
the U.S. government, and he probably thought he was, really good at what he did. And when you're really good at what you do, and people tell you you're really good at what you do, you get excited about that, and I understand. But yes, can you close the door on the fact that he's potentially a psyop? Not entirely. Sure,
Right.
I get
Right.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, this is very interesting, and
Hmm.
I think I don't know if it was Richard Dolan that said ufology is like having a 1,000-piece puzzle but no picture to go by.
Hmm.
And we're
Okay.
just
Yeah.
fitting all the pieces together and trying to figure out what is the big picture.
Marty, thank you so much for being here and helping me try to figure out the big picture with everybody.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, yeah, you too, brother. Is there anywhere that people can, find either your manuscript or anything else that you'd like to share?
The manuscript is actually available through AIAA, but the Ted Rowe from NARCAP actually put it on the NARCAP website. So I believe that's narcap.org.
Hmm.
And I can be found on LinkedIn.
Okay. All right, Marty, thanks so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this pop up episode of Coffee and UFOs. We live in really, really exciting times. As I've said before, 3 months ago, I would have still been in the, yeah, we're on track to disclosure in 10 years. Um, I'm thinking within 5 years, a full transparent disclosure is absolutely possible. Now I've talked to others and they're saying it's going to be 1 to 2 years, but either way, this is super, super exciting. So anyway, thank you again, Marty. Thank you everyone for joining.
Yep.
If you appreciate this podcast and this channel on Mystic Lounge, youtube.com/Mystic Lounge, please subscribe, click the notification bell. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, how many of you actually think we are close to disclosure within a year or so? Because that would be mind blowing if that's the case. And if you're a podcast listener, please jump over there, give a review, and share your opinion of the podcast down below. Thank you so much, everyone. Peace and love. And until next time, live in the mystery.